All right. We should have taken a break after that for about 15 minutes. We've got about another hour of lecture to go. Reason being is you have two quizzes to do, and I will allow you time to go to a computer lab to complete those by end of session today. So, what we're going to look at is the administration of the government. Um, and the Sultan's power came from um, just a lot of it came from his mere presence. Um, the palace area, part of it was called the Sublime Porte. This was the administrative center of the government. Uh, the Sultan did have private areas within the palace area. Part of that was for his harem, and um, this would be the area for his concubines. And when a lot of folks laugh when they hear harem and concubines, but many of these concubines were not there simply for the sexual aspect. It was a political aspect because they had access to the Sultan and therefore had an ear to him. Um, he would have his favorites, and with the favorites came the ability for them to um, conceive um, during copulation. And if the Sultan had a son with one of these concubines, that son would be the heir apparent based off the hierarchy we talked about earlier. And his mother would be called the Queen Mother, and she would um, have the ear of the Sultan. So she had that access. Um, these concubines, even though they were enslaved a lot of times, or were brought in for political reasons, they were educated. They were educated just like the Janissaries had been educated, brought over from oftentimes a Christian environment to and being brought into the Muslim concept right there. Uh, they were trained in areas, they were educated, like I said, they were taught reading, they were taught sewing, embroidery, music, and many times you're going to see that the slaves in this area, they were the exclusive property of the Sultan or the different powers that be. But, but here comes the key point. They served at the pleasure of the Sultan, at the power brokers and everything. The Sultan had a group around him, a council, an imperial council is what the book calls it, and they met 4 days a week. And the head of that council was called the Grand Vizier, the Grand Vizier. Um, and the Sultan, even though he was present, was not seen. He was behind a curtain, and the Sultan expressed his wishes of what the administrative council should do by signals that he sent to the Grand Vizier. And the Grand Vizier was the figurehead. He was the one who was in charge of the bureaucracy. Uh, Now, when we talk about the power structure, the the structure of the empire was you had different provinces, and each province had a governor. Um, this governor had civil duties. They had military duties. They had the ability to enforce taxation, uh, to settle land disputes, raising armies and such. So you have that. Now, let's look at something that is going to be a driving force with the Ottomans, and that's going to be religion. We've talked about them being Muslim. Well, what happens here is that the Ottomans, if you know anything about the Muslim religion, you have two major factions. You have the Sunnis and you have the Shiites. Well, remember we talked a little while ago that the Safavids were Shiites. Well, the Ottomans were Sunnis. Um, and what the Ottomans believed that the sultans there, their primary goal was to make sure that in the religious aspect that they kept the folks in line, um, maintained Islamic law, and as we know what Islamic law is, it is called Sharia. Sharia. Sharia is very um, rigid and everything. Many folks, we have folks here in this United States believe that we should adopt Sharia law here in the United States. Well, I'm wondering if you really want Sharia law. If you are female, under Sharia law, you have might near no rights whatsoever. If you are, um, I'm just going to throw it out there. If you are a member of the LGBT community and everything, uh, homosexuality, it goes very much against Muslim religion. Transgenderism goes against uh, Muslim religion, against Sharia law. And many times under this, if there's an infraction whatsoever under Islamic law, it is very brutal, sometimes even to the point of death. Um, and Sharia law applied to Muslims. If you were, and honest to goodness, here comes the kicker. Under Sharia law, if you fell under those areas under Sharia law, okay. But if you were not a Muslim, you were classified as an infidel. According to the Quran, if you were an infidel, um, Muslims could exercise jihad or a holy war against you and everything, and you could be killed. They emphasize that if you did not convert to Islam, that you could and should be killed because you were classified as an infidel. So that was part of their doctrine, part of their Sharia law. So just be mindful when you hear folks say, well, we need to be up under Sharia law. Do you really want to be under Sharia law? Because if you're not Muslim, if you are in a different group of people, if you're female, you probably don't want to be under Sharia law. So just be mindful of that. Uh, and how that minorities were treated under Muslim law was um, very different. They would tolerate, here in the Ottoman Empire, they would tolerate Orthodox Christians, Jews, but these different organizations, these different groups of people, they had to pay a tax, a head tax, just to be able to participate in their own activities and such. But if they paid that head tax, they could practice their own religion, but it was highly emphasized that they convert to Islam. Okay? When we look at the social classes and such, when we look at the social classes, um, there were four main groups. You had peasants, you had the artisans, merchants, and you had the pastoral folks. Um, the pastoral folks, I'm not talking about they're being religious. The pastoral folks were the ones that worked the land. They were herdsmen. They worked with the livestock. The first three lived in and around the cities. Um, the peasants, um, they leased land from landowners. Um, well, from the state, I apologize. They leased land from the state. Um, but they cannot own the land. They cannot own the land. Um, cannot sell it. The artisans, these were the ones that exercised their craft. They were weavers. They were the ones that made furniture such as that. These are going to be the ones. Um, then you have the merchants who obviously bought and sold goods. But as we said, the pastorals are the ones that work the land like that. Um, the merchants, when we look at them, the book says this: they were the most privileged class there. Uh, it said many times they were exempt from government regulations. They were exempt from taxes, and because of that, they were able to amass fortunes and such. And many times you would see these merchants join forces with each other, and they would charge exorbitant prices, which made other folks just flat out mad with them. Okay? Made folks mad with them. Um, when we look at women, when we look at the women, women were subject to the laws of the Ottoman Empire, also to the direct supervision of the male in charge of them. And I don't mean that derogatory, I'm just simply stating history. Uh, what happens here is, so it took care of the women were to be taken care of, but they still didn't have a lot of power. Um, you're going to see under the Ottoman Empire, you're going to see some relaxation of the strict Islamic laws. Women were allowed to own property. They could inherit. One of the big things was women could not be forced into marriage. And in certain cases, for a woman to um, ask for and receive a divorce, in rare cases, was allowed. You're even going to see in very rare cases women exerting political power. But the Ottoman Empire is going to do just like we said at the very beginning. You start up, you go down. You start up, you go down. And it's going to be during this decline because you get folks that they get lax. They expect things to be the way they've always been without them having to do any work. Well, it doesn't always work that way. You have that privileged group of individuals, and because of that you don't have any change. You're going to see technological advances. You're going to see movable type print and press presented there. You're going to see mechanical clocks come into being. Military technology, we already talked about the use of gunpowder so that you now have an artillery, you have muskets. Uh, and much of the Ottoman Empire starts mimicking the Europeans that they were trying to actually take over. Um, as far as fashion, purchasing goods such as Western furniture, art objects. You're also going to see some change that, because if you know anything about Islam, that they are very not tolerant of such things as alcohol and tobacco. Well, you're going to see that occur. Sexual activity outside of marriage is going to be more prevalent. And again, this is going to lead to a downfall of the Ottoman Empire. You're also going to see the Ottomans here, and when we look at their art, a lot of their art that we mention has to do with their architecture and everything. They built a very extravagant mosque there that was a replica of the Byzantine church there of Hagia Sophia. The floor plan of that was mimicked in many places throughout the empire. All right. Well, next thing we're going to look at is going to be the Safavids. The Safavids. Now, the Safavids are going to come in to play after the Ottoman Empire. Now, they're going to run parallel there for a while. The book actually says that the Safavid dynasty was founded by a Shah, their leader, Ismail, in 1487. Now, Ismail was the descendant of Sheikh Safi al-Din, and this is where we're going to get the word Safavid from. Now, why is all of this important? Because Safi al-Din is able to trace his origins back to Ali, and based off of historical findings, Ali was the fourth Imam of the Muslim faith. So that means you have Muhammad, then three Imams, and then you have Ali. Well, Safi ad-Din is able to trace his origins back to Ali, so that gives him a religious as well as a political base to draw from. Well, you're going to see the Safavids are going to, whereas the Ottomans are able to, they are Sunnis, the Safavids are going to be more toward the Shiite or the more activist arm of Islam. You're going to see within this organization, the Safavids, the ones that adhere to this activist Shiite version, they are going to be called redheads. Reason being is they wore a very distinctive red cap. And this red cap symbolizes their allegiance to the Imams of the Shiite faith. Well, Ishmael, as we said, started reigning in 1487, running parallel with the Ottomans. Well, Ishmael takes over much of the Abbasid Empire in 1501. He becomes what he calls the Shah of Iran. He does want it to be called Persia. He calls it Iran or Iran. Uh, Baghdad uh, is ransacked, and under Ishmael, you have the Shiite faith now being utilized and promoted over the Sunni faith. The Sunni faith is the one that is predominant, but the Shiites are exercising power over them. And matter of fact, they're going to send Shiite preachers into the countryside to proselytize. Okay? Now, um, the Ottomans did not take this well. Um, they invade the Shiites. We talked about Selim the First invading Safavid territory, beating them, but Selim couldn't keep control over them. So Ishmael regained the city just a few years after 1514. Uh, the Ottomans come back in the 1580s. And like I said, this is a problem with history because we just jumped from about 1520 to 1580, 60 years in one breath. But you're going to have a new Safavid Shah called Abbas. Abbas. Matter of fact, it's going to be Abbas the Great. And he's signs a peace treaty with them. But Abbas the Great, he is the one who is able to bring the Safavids together and emphasize his power base. Iran is strong, it is stable until his death in 1529. Pardon me, 1629. 1629. But when he dies, you start having major conflicts within the Safavid community. Power struggle right there. And because of that, you're going to see Afghan rebels come in there, Afghan warriors, and they drive the Safavids back to Azerbaijan, their original homeland. When we look at the politics of the Safavids, you have a mixed society. You have Turkish-speaking individuals, you have pastoral peoples, you have European influences, you have the Safavids there. You have so much going on. But the Safavids, for the most part, were Persian, Iranian. They practiced the Shiite faith. And that Shiite faith is a unifying factor. A unifying factor of the Safavids. You're going to have individuals that they get their power and they have their power and it's passed on through heredity. Through heredity. Because you have the leader, the Shah, who is in control not just of the government but of the religion, the Shiite religion, and you have all this going on. Within the political structure, as I was fixing to say just a minute ago, much of theirs came by appointment. And the problem when you appoint folks is may not always be getting the best individual, but what you have may be those that are simply there because of who they know. So you're going to see a transition of that to where that the Safavids understood that sometimes you had to do it by merit. You earn the position, guess what? You get it. So that's going to be part of it. Um, there in Persia, you're going to see um, what the book calls a flowering of the arts. Um, their metal work was very imaginative. They love to use blue, especially in their tiles, when they were installing the interiors of buildings and everything. You're going to see the weaving of silk. If you know anything about interior design, Persian rugs, especially those from this time period, are very expensive, very sought out. Um, so the weaving of silk, the weaving of rugs is going to be a very big deal. And when we look at the conflict between the Ottomans and the Safavids, you're not going to get um, a truce between the Ottomans and the Safavids until the year 1638. And for about almost 85 years, you're going to have these two walking side by side. But the Safavid Empire will go away somewhere around 1723. Somewhere around 1723. All right. So the next group that we need to look at are the Mughals. Mughals. The Mughals. They started out in India, the northern part of India, somewhere around the early 16th century, the early 1500s. Um, why is that significant? Because this is viewed by many as a major time of the um, Indian culture. And the Europeans think that whenever they got there, when you had the Portuguese fleet came into Calcutta in 1498, that um, the Portuguese was coming to an uneducated, uncultured area. No. Um, you're going to see um, the Mughals were already there. The Mughals were not native to India. They had come uh, from the area north of the Ganges River. And the head of the Mughals, the leader of the Mughals, was an individual by the name of Babur. 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 Um, his father had descended from Tamerlane, and his mother was from Genghis Khan. So, if you know your prior history to this, Tamerlane and Genghis Khan, these were two of the greatest Asian leaders during that time, and Babur is a descendant of that. Now, Babur had gotten his ability to lead because he had inherited part of Tamerlane's empire right there in India. And how he came into power was that he helped the dynasty that is in place. He said, hey, I'll help you, you help me. You help me, I help you. So that's how he helps propped up that dynasty that was already in place against his opponent, against their opponents. And you're going to see Babur as a military genius and everything. He has advanced weapons. Again, this is in the late part of the 1400s, early 1500s. So artillery, such as cannons, are going to help that. You're also going to see him incorporate a very mobile cavalry, okay? But when we think of cavalry, we think of horses. Well, he's actually going to use elephants as part of his cavalry. It says in 1526, he went up against the enemy force 10 times his size. He had 12,000 men. So that means that he's going up against a force of about 120,000 men. And he is going to capture the city of Delhi. And he is actually going to keep conquering there in northern India until he dies in 1530. Now, the book talks about this, that Babur, on top of his pedigree of being a descendant of Tamerlane, of Genghis Khan, well, he is very charismatic. I mean, he could sell ice to an Eskimo. So we need to be mindful of that. And because he is such an outstanding leader, folks will follow him to the jumping off point. And that makes him very very loved by his followers. But when you look at how he died and everything, we talked about him dying at 47. He died because he fell after smoking opium. We think that the drug problem has just now started. No, we're talking about the 1500s, and Babur dies because he fell after smoking opium. So one of those. I'm sorry, Babur does not. His son. I almost said his name. Humayun um, takes over, and he's the one who dies by falling from smoking opium. The book describes Humayun as this: intelligent but lazy, and that's a key point. He is not as good a leader as his daddy, but in 1556 he does die. He is succeeded by his son, Akbar, who is going to rule from 1556 to 1605. Akbar is 14 years old when he takes over leadership. He is very energetic about going out into the world. He wants to extend his domain. He has made this remark: a monarch should be ever intent on conquest, otherwise his neighbors rise in arms against him. The army should be exercised in warfare, lest from wanting training they become self-indulgent. And according to the book, under Akbar, you have the greatest Indian empire in 2,000 years. So, a key point right there. Greatest empire in 2,000 years. Again, we look at religion here in India. And because of the European influence, the Catholics, remember that the missionary arm of the Catholic Church oftentimes are the Jesuits. They had a mission there in 1588. Uh, you're going to see Akbar um, listening to the Jesuits, but it says in his latter years he becomes very hostile against the Islam faith. Uh, he actually institutes a new faith called the Divine Faith, which takes um, multiple religions and forms his own, um, which is based off of this, and it is based off a central belief in the infallibility of all decisions made by the emperor. So, if the emperor says it's gospel, and very conceited in that. Under the um, under these individuals, you're going to see um, Zamindars, who are going to be the leaders of um, much of the land. These Zamindars are going to be responsible for collecting taxes, uh, forward them up to the central government. They also settle disputes. And when we talk about taxes, it was not unusual for an Indian peasant to pay 1/3 of their entire output. And remember, peasants, they're growing crops and everything. 1/3 of their output goes to the government. Well, if you're having a good year, 1/3 you can live with, but you're also going to see the fact of you're going to see drought conditions hit, and if there's nothing there, you can't make somebody pay when there's nothing in there. Um, Akbar will die in 1605. He is succeeded by his son Jehangir, who reigned for about 23 years to 1628. And so you have that, and you get down to the reign of Nur Jahan. Nur Jahan. And Nur Jahan deals with domestic problems, okay? Deals with domestic problems. And when you have these problems and such, um, with domestic problems, because you have no taxes, uh, the treasury's empty and such. So you've got all that going on. Mir Jahan moved the capital in 1648 to Delhi. And one of the things that we remember about Shah Jahan is the building of the Taj Mahal. Um, it is believed, considered, many feel this way, that it is the most beautiful building ever built on the earth. Jahan built this as a tomb for his wife. Um, it said it took 20,000 masons over 20 years to build the Taj Mahal. And because it cost so much and everything, taxes kept being raised, and the common folks just could not live with that. Um, after Jahan, his sons fight over who's going to run the show after he dies, and you're going to have the one son right there, uh, Orangib, Orangib, and he's very controversial. And I probably said his name right, so um, he was high principled. He thought that he could get rid of the social evils of what's going on there in India. Prior to this time, a woman, a wife, if her husband died, her husband was cremated on a funeral pyre. And it was a common practice for the woman when they light that fire, she throws her body onto that pyre to to die with her husband. So um, that was it. He also did not believe in the castration of eunuchs. He did not want illegal taxation. Um, he tried to forbid gambling, drinking, prostitution, and because he was a very devout Muslim, uh, he he was not very tolerant of other religions. So you have all that going on. Have all that going on. Uh, you're going to see, as we talked about, with the Portuguese coming in there to Calcutta, the Europeans are going to start making inroads into there. The English and the Dutch, on top of the Portuguese, are all going to saturate the market, for lack of a better term. Um, you're going to see in 1619 the English set up factories there in India. Uh, the Dutch are going to give way to the English. They're going to pretty much the English are going to pretty much run the show there as far as um, the markets are concerned there in India. Um, you're going to see the British, the East India Company is going to drive the French out. The Portuguese are going to get pushed. Understand this: that the leaders of the British leader of this time here in India is an individual by the name of Sir Robert Clive. Sir Robert Clive. And under his leadership, the French are going to, as I said, be driven out, and the English are going to take over that. When we look at the three different empires that we have talked about in this chapter, um, firearms are going to play a major part of that. You're going to see some wonderful leadership. You're going to see leadership that couldn't find their butt with both hands. Religious issues. Um, so the key point of all of this is, as the leaderships went, you were able to have that. So that is where we're going to be able to finish up today. All right, listen to me. Do not put it off, because at 10:30 these quizzes will end. Okay? These quizzes will end. So at this point, either if you have a laptop, access your laptop. Do not attempt this on your phones. I strongly discourage that. I'm not telling you can't, but I strongly discourage it. That one, you have a syllabus quiz. It is due before 10:30 this morning. And you have a chapter 16 quiz due this morning. Follow the directions. Once you open it up, the clock stops. The clock starts. There's no way to stop the clock. So once you start the quiz, understand you got to finish it. Okay? With that being said, study hard, do well, exceed your own expectations, and have those completed by 10:30. And we will see you on Friday. Have a good one.